Thanks for joining me, Ezekiel.
Glad to be here.
It's been a while, and part of the reason is you've been busy traveling around, and you were on our side of the pond, as they say. Though unfortunately we didn't manage to meet. But maybe we could start with what you got up to in Europe, Ezekiel.
Yeah, I kept a couple of things to that side of the pond. I think the British are the one that say that this side of the pond or that side of the pond, as if the big ocean separating Europe from America is a pond. That's what they say. But yeah, a couple of times. Uh, for no other reason than to meet friends and at the same time try to find some kind of resolution. First, to bring people together, people with different um, political ideas, different interests, different persuasions, different ideologies to come together and discuss the the, um, the trajectory, the political trajectory in the country, and if nothing is done about it, what it would uh, end up, what would end up happening. We wanted to discuss this and to come together. So there is a symbolic significance there, also a substantive contribution to the political discourse in the country. That is, even people who have been at war, you could say, at war in the country, could now sit together because there is nothing that we could do if we don't come together, if we don't talk to people we do not like, we do not appreciate, we do not have anything in common with, but we are living in the same country, sharing the same space. But for whatever the political future of that country is, it has to be through dialogue, not killing each other as we have, because you know this. I don't tell you. It the level of uh, uh, conflict, the casualties of conflict in the country is staggering, in the millions. No conflict in the world has been deadlier than the conflict in Ethiopia, bloodier than the conflicts in Ethiopia. So I think everybody is tired at this moment, and they really want to see if there is a way uh, out of the morass that we are in. That's what brought me to your side of the pond.
Well, maybe we'll come back to the specific issues that you discussed because you issued a communique. I don't know how many of our viewers would have been aware of that, but maybe I thought we would go directly to Ethiopia and take stock of what has been happening, and especially the issue in relation to Ethiopia and Eritrea. I think a lot of people have well-placed fear that the war might be coming, not least because of um, the war drumming from the Ethiopian regime side, and the Eritrean regime also seems to be um, well responding in kind lately. And one issue that people talk about, from what I sense, is whether this is some sort of posturing on Ethiopia's side or some tactic to get the Eritrean regime to the negotiating table, or whether there is real plan for war, not least to restore the Assab port, as they say. So what do you make of that?
Well, we know that since, I don't know, maybe 2024 or so, right, or even before that, maybe 2023, the Ethiopian Prime Minister has made this an issue that Ethiopia should have access to the sea. And he made it an issue. There was no demand for it in the country. No one was clamoring for that. Not the political parties, not the public, not the business community. Demand for a port has not been an economic or political or legal issue in Ethiopia, but the Prime Minister of Ethiopia single-handedly made it an issue. He made it an issue, and now it's the big issue in Ethiopia. When we talk about what is happening or what is being claimed by Ethiopia, I think we have to make our terminologies, the phraseologies clear. What is it that Ethiopia wants? Does anybody know? As far as I'm concerned, they're wavering between three positions. One, they claim, some areas, they claim that Ethiopia needs a sovereign port because Ethiopia was denied a sovereign port. That is to say, not access to the sea, but a sovereign port, a port that Ethiopia owns, operates, and could even station a naval force there. That is Ethiopia's territory. That Ethiopia's territory would have to become a literal territory. That means Ethiopia must be literal. Ethiopia must find its border all the way to the Red Sea or the Gulf of Aden or the Indian Ocean, whichever it is. That is the first thing, that whether it's a sovereign port or access to the sea or a naval base, so those three positions are really merged together. There is no clarity, but we have to, when we discuss what is it that Ethiopia is looking for. For me, sovereign port is just like I was just saying, Ethiopia must have a territory that borders a sea, a body of water. That is what a sovereign port is. Access to the sea is recognized by international law. Landlocked country, by international law, must have access to the sea. Let me say a couple of things about what that means. If there is a country, like for instance, Eritrea is a literal country. Its land borders the Red Sea, and by law, Eritrea has about I guess 12 miles as a territorial water, and then about 200 miles into the sea. That is what Eritrea has. But Ethiopia needs not access. To be honest, it's not that access. Ethiopia could have access to Eritrea's territorial water. It needs access to the high seas. That's what the international law says. They have to have access to the high seas, not to somebody else's, some other country's sovereign territorial waters. So what Ethiopia is asking when they say access to the sea is access to the high seas. What that means is, of course, Ethiopia needs to have the merchant sail through the territorial water of the country that is in question, and that will be negotiated as well. So international law supports that any landlocked country have access to the sea in the way that I understood it. Well, the third is a naval base. Well, you could have a navy, and in an agreement with another country, you could station your navy as a military port. You can have a navy only when you have your own sovereign territory that borders a sea. So all of these needs to be clarified, but Ethiopia has not made that clarified as a policy statement. If this is the Ethiopian policy, that Ethiopia should have a sovereign port, that Ethiopia is entitled a sovereign port for whatever reason, then the Ethiopian government must make that clear and stated as a policy of the Ethiopian government. They haven't, to be honest. So far, Ethiopia as a country has not said this is our policy. You could see commanders of colleges, military colleges, and some random generals talk about it. The chief of staff of the Ethiopian Armed Forces talk about it. But whether what he's saying is Ethiopia's policy position or not, we don't know. We don't know, because Ethiopia did not put a white paper saying that this is what we need. The Prime Minister had said in Parliament many things. He takes access to the sea, whether he understands the difference between these three positions or not, I don't know, but he mixed them up. He mixed them up all the time. So there is really no policy position that has been deciphered so far. But from the pronouncements that the Prime Minister, the Chief of Staff, and these random generals, and I say random generals because what did the commander of a staff college have to do with the policy? Staff college general, a brigadier general, is enunciating what can pass for a policy position, and I wouldn't do that if I were a leader of a country, because it has to have a clear statement, a policy position by the government. So these random generals pronounce one thing or another at different points. One leader's position was the head of the Foreign Affairs Directorate of the Ministry, the Ethiopian Armed Forces, a major general, at one point took his time and talked about it. So the position is that, number one, Ethiopia was illegally denied access to the sea, or a port. A port was taken away from Ethiopia because of a collusion of some bandits. I think they're referring to the EPLF and TPLF. And that Ethiopia's cause was harmed. Ethiopia was harmed by the collusion of these two liberation fronts. That was wrong, and it should be righted. That is the first position. Of course, there is a lot of holes in that idea that it's not just a collusion of two Ethiopia-hating political parties or liberation fronts that made Ethiopia lose territory. But he also says that Ethiopia's history, the history of maintaining its own sovereign port. The third is demography. And they say that I guess in the Tana Forum, demography. That is, Ethiopia is about 130 million people. As the population is about 130 million people. It's likely the next quarter century would be 200 million. And according to the Chief of Staff of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, according to the Chief of Staff, in a speech that he delivered yesterday, which amounts to a genocidal threat, he said 2 million people cannot determine the defense of 200 million people. Whether by hook or crook, he said, Bale and Bole in the spill, but he said by hook or by crook, we're going to get it. Because of the demographic weight that Ethiopia has. So this has nothing to do with international law or the law of sea. It is because Ethiopia is big, Eritrea is small, Ethiopia should have a territory. Third, geography. We're only 60 miles away from the Red Sea, so it's just not the right for Ethiopia to be so close to the Red Sea and not access to the sea. It's just not right. Geography. They say it's politics, that the time has come because Ethiopia is now under a government that rules or defends the interests of Ethiopia, the implication of which means other governments, especially the Ethiopia government, was not acting in the interest of Ethiopia. The politics was not right at the time. Now the politics is right. Now we are claiming territory. Now, all of this is not valid. All of it is not valid. Ethiopia never had access a port, a sovereign port. In the last, well, put it this way, in the last 1,000 years, when Ethiopia lost its port, was when the White Empire collapsed. Since then, they have been trying. Ethiopia had been trying to get its own port, but the only time that it got its own port was when Eritrea was federated with Ethiopia. from 1952 to 1991, 40 years in 1,000 years. History, that's the history. Democracy, is there any country that says, because I am big, I have a lot of population, I am entitled to territory, another country's territory? I don't think there is any international law that supports that claim. Third, geography. Because you're so close, you have to. I don't understand all of it. All of these things, I don't quite understand that Ethiopia really has a legitimate claim, a legitimate historical, demographic, geographic, and political claim. So, is that posturing? As we just say, is that posturing? I think Ethiopia is trying to have it both ways, as far as I'm concerned. There is posturing to divert attention from the economic, political, administrative, and security problems that they have within the country. They have to divert. It's a political ploy, the old political ploy of diversion. It is doing that, and they have additional ways of diverting public attention from their own predicaments. The Eritreans have been, as far as I'm concerned, they have been responding to the threats that come from Ethiopia. They've been responding, saying that we will not give our territory, we will not compromise on sovereignty, but they're basically responding to the various pronouncements and declarations by Ethiopian officials. As late as yesterday, the chief was saying what I was saying. For me, what he said about 2 million cannot deny 200 million access to the sea amounts to a genocidal threat. What are you going to do then? He says by hook or by crook. That means we will hold a gun to Eritrea's head and force them to negotiate. If not, we will shoot them. Is what he's saying. So it's a very dangerous process that's going on. Ethiopia, I don't stand against Ethiopia acquiring a port or access to the port, which is never denied, or a navy. But it doesn't require aggression. It doesn't require war. It doesn't require sacrificing another 200,000 young Eritreans and young Ethiopians for this, because the arrangement that Ethiopia had for the last 30 years, as far as access to the sea is concerned, has served Ethiopia well up to this point.
Well, it's excellent that you made a distinction between access to the sea, to the high sea, and then having a naval base. It's never clear what the Ethiopian regime officials mean when they say access to the sea. They use umbrella term, and one can not tell whether it's because they want to have ambiguity deliberately, or it's because they don't know what they are saying. But anyway, one constant thing they say. Is, and this is something that you briefly mentioned, is that the 1991 that Eritrea ended up with both ports was a historical mistake. They always say in Amharic, "Sibrat Gana," and that now is the time to right the significant historical wrongs that they say. And the implication is that Ethiopia did indeed own ports until 1991, but he seemed to be saying, well, he clearly said that Ethiopia, in fact, didn't own. So I want to push you on that, what you mean when you say Ethiopia didn't in any real sense own the ports, because this would run contradictory to what many Ethiopians believe, that Ethiopia owned ports until 1991, when the TPLF recklessly gave away the ports.
That is true, but when did it begin? When did Ethiopia have its own sovereign port? Three positions: sovereign port, access to the sea, and military naval base. Three of them. When Ethiopia lost ports was 1991. That is true in part, but Ethiopia has its own access to its own sovereign port when Eritrea was federated with Ethiopia in 1952. That's it. That's when Ethiopia had. Before that, the Italians owned it. Well, the British administered it for for about 10 years. The Italians owned it for about 60, 70 years. Before that, it was part of the Ottoman Empire. Before that, it was contested. There were kingdoms like the Adal Kingdom. There were kingdoms that had access to the sea, or local warlord controlled it. But Ethiopia as a state, even if you accept that Ethiopia existed as a state for 1,000 years, believing that yes, Aksum was probably a predecessor of Ethiopia, and then Landlocked, and then Gondar, and then Ankober, and then Addis Ababa. Well, Emperor Menelik, who is actually the person that unified and created the contemporary Ethiopian state, he signed with the Italians, recognizing the Italian claim and left Eritrea alone. So I just told you the 500 history who controlled the Red Sea port. So when was that Ethiopia had? Is during the Zaman Massamet? Was that during the Zaman Massamet Ethiopia had it? Is that during the Agau kingdom of Lalibela? When was it? So look, I think people are entitled to their opinion on that, but the historical record is clear. No one contests that Ethiopia controlled or asserted sovereign access when Eritrea was federated with Ethiopia by Resolution 350 or 59 of the United Nations. That's it. From 52 to 91, Ethiopia had access to the sea. But when Ethiopia abrogated the federation, the Eritreans went to resist it. For 30 years, they fought it. And they restored Eritrea to its independent status. And this is the African culture. This is international law. Borders drawn by the colonial era are sacrosanct. That's what it is. Now, after that, in 1991, the rebels won. They defeated the Dark Army. Are we contesting that? We don't need any eyewitness to this. We were there. I remember that. The Dark regime was defeated. I know it's painful to many Ethiopians. Then as an Ethiopian, I could feel it too. But the facts are the facts. The rebel force defeated the government. The government fell. Is that a matter to be contested? That the government fell? That the Eritrean, the EPLF, Eritrean People's Liberation Front, decided to establish its own administration, and then United Nations administered a referendum in which 99% of Eritreans, of the 100 that voted, 99% voted for independence. And then Eritrea became an independent state. An independent state. That's what Eritrea is. Whether that is painful to Ethiopians to accept, you can lament that this happened, but this happened and Eritrea became an independent state. I remember the day that Boutros Ghali at the United Nations hoisted the Eritrean flag. He recognized that Eritreans fought for 30 years, and after that they conducted a referendum and became an independent country. What was the harm? That Meles Zenawi actually agreed to abide by the fait accompli, and then developed a different strategy as far as Ethiopia's access to the port. What is the brokenness that Prosperity Party is trying to amend? I don't know. These are the facts. I think a lot of people could say that, but it doesn't run contrary to the historical fact that Ethiopia had a sovereign port for 40 years. Not more, not less, 39 to be exact.
Well, as you know, Isked, the pushback from many Ethiopians would be that regardless of these finer details of history, that Eritrea didn't exist as a country until 1991. So that would be the first point, that Eritrea was part and parcel of Ethiopia. And the second point would be that the referendum in 1991 that you just mentioned wasn't really a referendum. It was a sham arrangement that the TPLF and the PLF organized to hurt Ethiopia because, they would argue, because they hated Ethiopia. So you know the talking points from Ethiopia's side.
Yeah, but I dismiss them. I just reject them because they're not true. It's not true. It's painful. Defeat is not a happy moment. So defeat is a painful thing to swallow. But what happened. There are irregularities or whatever, but the fact is the fact. Eritrea is an independent country. I know they sometimes they hear them say, in 1991, Assab was a self-governing unit. I know that they say that. I refer them to the man that was Eritrea's governor at that time, Major Dawit Wolde-Giorgis, actually said, sure, it was a self-governing, but Eritrea, Tigray, Eritrea were self-governing as well. They were self-governing within Ethiopia. That doesn't change the fact that what matters in this case is not the internal reorganization of administrative regions in Ethiopia, but international law, the colonial boundaries. Whether we like it or not, the colonial boundaries are the colonial boundaries, and that's where states in Africa are. I mean, there are unfair borders. Somalia has this irredentist ambition, as the Ethiopians say. You know that they call it irredentist, right? In Ethiopia, they've been saying that. The Oromo are on the Kenyan side, on the Somali side, on the Ethiopian side. Oh, it's unfair. They should be a nation. You can say that about any country in Africa. That was wrong. The colonial moment in Ethiopia was wrong. There is nothing you could do about it because states in Africa emerged in the aftermath of the colonial period. Then the African Union and Africans accepted that as unfair as it is, the borders are the borders. The new nations have no connection to pre-existing legitimacies before the pre-colonial time. These nations in Africa emerged because of colonialism, European colonialism in Africa. Angola is Angola because it was a Portuguese territory. Mozambique is a Portuguese territory. Egypt, all the way from Egypt, all the way down from Cape to Cairo, these were British territories, variously administered. That's how they came into existence. And this was accepted. It's unfair. Yes, it's unfair. But changing that would be more unfair than the existing facts, and that's why the Cairo Declaration and the Organization of African Unity at the time accepted colonial boundaries as sacrosanct. What makes Ethiopia different? What makes Ethiopia different? What about the doctrine, even in the colonial period, the doctrine of the winner? You win the conquest. If you win the conquest, you arrange the post-conquest time. The Ethiopian government lost the war to the Eritrean Liberation Front. The Ethiopian government. I'm not saying Ethiopians lost. The Ethiopian government, their government, lost. It lost the war. If it didn't lose, maybe Eritrea would still be fighting. The rebels might still be fighting. But those are counterfactual claims. What we should be talking about is what exists now, what international law allows Ethiopia rights, and that Ethiopia could use. By the way, talk to the Eritreans. Talk to the Eritreans because Assab and Massawa were free ports. Talk to them. You were with them. You were allies with them, and I say this to the Ethiopian government, you were allies with the Eritrean government in fighting your own people in Tigray. If you could talk to them constantly to fight against Tigray, why can't you talk to them to have access to the ports? Why is that impossible? International law allows you to do that. By the way, didn't Djibouti actually say, all right, if access to port is what you wanted, if you wanted sovereign access, we have Tajura. Let's talk about it. Djibouti offered now the Saudi Arabian port operations company signed a 30-year treaty to upgrade, to rebuild, and to operate the ports of Tajura, which the Ethiopians actually refused to do. What Ethiopia needs is a port. So if this is what Ethiopia wants, a legitimate thing, which I think Ethiopia could have if they follow the right way of negotiating with the neighboring countries, we could find it. What brought violence as a choice? War must not be the first choice. It should be the last resort. So that's all I have to say. The facts are the facts. It's not what I wish. It's not what I think is unfair. There is a lot of unfairness in international politics and international relations, but you do what is possible to try to avoid the death of human beings. And that's what the Ethiopians are rooting for right now. They want violence, they want conflict, they want Eritrea, their own ally. Listen to this and I will stop. This same defense chief of staff of the Ethiopian Armed Forces. This is the same man that said to Tigrayan, you can leave. Yeah, you can exercise and you can leave. The same man who is now saying that it's okay for Ethiopia's part of Ethiopia, an Ethiopian population. It's okay for them to leave. All right? That's not Ethiopia's interest. But is it in the interest of Ethiopia to conquer another country? Look at the irony.
Well, okay, so let's make a distinction between the regime and the maybe good faith Ethiopians who make claims about about access to the sea in whatever form of the three distinctions you made. I think it's easy to dismiss because it's very difficult to make the case that the regime is pursuing Ethiopia's interests anyway. I think there is an agreement that Abiy is in there for himself and for his own survival. But if we listen to the more sensible Ethiopians, they would say that it's not fair that a nation of 120 million people, as they say, is condemned to be a prisoner of geography, as they say, in reference to the Tim Marshall book, Prisoners of Geography, and that something has to give, and that Eritreans have to be sympathetic to this predicament of Ethiopia. That is what they would say, that there has to be a win-win arrangement between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and that it doesn't matter what the historical factors are. The historical factors that you just summoned, they don't in a way matter because Ethiopia is a big nation that is surrounded by these literal nations, and that they have to understand Ethiopia's pain and that they have to share the resource. How credible is that with that argument from Ethiopians?
It's not even logical. Democratic side itself does not entitle you to a sovereign port. It doesn't. There is no law. The only law is that you have to have commercial access to the sea. There is nothing like that. Look, if Ethiopians are really interested in a sovereign port, an Ethiopian sovereign port, if they are interested in that, that is a way. It's called land swap. Some countries have tried that, like Jordan did the land swap, I think, with Saudi Arabia to get access to the northern tip of the Red Sea. So you can swap land. But this comes through diplomacy, through negotiations. It comes through negotiations. You don't have to threaten another country with war. So if that's what Ethiopia wants, sovereign access, sovereign port, not access, sovereign port, when Ethiopia could have commercial access to the rest of the world and could station its naval base, if that's what Ethiopia wants, make that the policy of Ethiopia, and then execute it through diplomacy, through negotiation. There is that possibility. Bolivia, for instance, lost access to the Pacific in the war of 1906 to Chile. Bolivia and Chile tried land swap, but it didn't work. Bolivia took Chile to the International Court of Justice, and the International Court of Justice found that Chile, that took the land in a war in 1906 from Bolivia, is not obligated. Did you hear that? Obligated, not obligated to give land swap or land access to Bolivia. There is a ruling on this issue, There is a ruling on this issue. There is no international basis for that. But you can negotiate bilaterally. You can negotiate. If Ethiopia wants this sovereign force, that could happen if you could negotiate. If what we are talking about is access to the sea, which means commercial access for Ethiopia's import and export trade, if that's what Ethiopia wants, economic, that is, the demographic weight might be relevant to that argument, to say that we are too many, that Djibouti alone is not going to be able to accommodate our needs. We need more. We need more ports. That was the position of Meles Zenawi, diversification. The diversification of access to sea for Ethiopia, that was his policy. And that was the Ethiopian government's policy. Instead of being wedded to Assab itself, which ended after the war with the Ethiopia-Eritrea war, the government of Meles Zenawi, the EPRDF government, decided that strategically, going forward, strategically, what we will do is grow Ethiopia's economy, make peace with all of our neighbors, come to good understanding, so that each one of these 6 or 7 countries that have ports could have access. In that case, you're going to create a competition between these countries to almost beg Ethiopia to use their ports. That was the strategy. It worked. It worked for the last 30 years. What happened to Ethiopia? Because you got to hit the 120 or 130 million mark, what happened to Ethiopia? Did the volume of trade increase? Are we talking about what might happen in the future? Well, go another 100 or 200 miles, and there is Berbera. And the last path, by the way, which Ethiopia actually is having access to Lamu. You want more? Go and talk to the Somalis, and so that you can have access to Kismayu or Mogadishu. Yeah, these are ports. If access is what is needed, and Ethiopia's economy is such a high volume that it needs multiple ports, just talk to them. That's what they're asking. Djibouti is asking for that, for God's sake. Djibouti is asking for more negotiations, for God's sake. Somalia is asking for the negotiations. That's what the Ankara Declaration is saying. 3 negotiations. That's what international community is asking Ethiopia to do. Not war. So this is possible. It's access to the port. If Ethiopia wants a navy, well, then go and talk to Djibouti or Somaliland, keep talking to them, and get a land access or a military base. All of this says one thing. What Ethiopia wants could be achieved through negotiations, through give and take, through diplomacy. All of Ethiopia's neighbors are ready to do it. Why threaten Eritrea or any other country by force, through violence? Why threaten that? Why is that necessary? Why is that the last resort? All of these countries are saying, let's talk. Djibouti is not going to be a viable state without Ethiopia. Djibouti needs the port. It's not going to use it by itself. It doesn't need it. The Djibouti port is a natural harbor for Ethiopia. Without Ethiopia, it's not going to be productive and profitable. So what is needed is not violence, not conflict, not threats. What is needed is negotiations. If you want me to add to this, if Ethiopia takes Assab by force. As they say, if they go to war and take Ethiopia access by force, number one, they are beginning a new chapter of conflict with Eritrea. Number one. We're going to go back to square one. The Eritreans, if it is taken by force, they're not going to sit back, lose their territory, and accept the Ethiopian aggression as fait accompli. They go to asymmetrical war. Number two, if Ethiopia takes Assab by force, it has to rebuild Assab. It has to rebuild Assab to a port that could accommodate new shipping technology. It has to be a new port. It's not been in use for the last nearly 40 years, so it has to be upgraded, and that requires about $40 billion. And then connect Assab to Ethiopia, another $10 billion, so about $50 billion. Are you sure that's what you want to do? Are you sure that's what you want to do? And thirdly, if you get your own port, does that mean that you're not going to spend your own money maintaining it, paying for energy, for security, for transportation? So even after you spend $50 rebuilding it, you still have to operate it, and the cost of operation is not going to be free. So if you use your mind, if people use their mind, not their blind patriotism, this is not about the Assab port. This is not the fact that Ethiopia is faced with an existential threat if it doesn't have Assab as a port or any other sovereign port. It's not true. It's just political posturing on the part of the Ethiopian government. Number one, to divert attention from its predicament, and secondly, they really want to remove Isaias from power. They think Isaias is a destabilizer in Ethiopia by supporting number one TDF and the FANO and the OLA. That's what they think. By eliminating Isaias Afewerki, they're going to have access to. This is their reasoning: access to, or they're going to reconquer Assab, and then remove any threats to the Ethiopian regime once and for all. That's their calculation. I don't think it's going to come to pass.
I suppose that the reason some people believe it could be more than posturing on the part of Abiy is because, I mean, you mentioned the practical arrangements that Ethiopia could make with Somalia and Djibouti if it was really interested in ports, right? But these are mundane things, and Abiy is not interested in that, as we know. He's interested in the extraordinary, in, for instance, forcefully reclaiming Assab and then being paraded as a savior, as a hero. I think that is what he wants, and the reason why some people think that he might really go into war with Eritrea is because of this. But you don't seem to be of that persuasion. You seem to believe that it's nothing more than posturing on the part of Abiy. But while we're at it, Abiy, to just Ezekiel, to kind of close the circle in terms of the Assab port and the war, a possible war with Eritrea, there is a strand of thought that is getting traction among Tigrayans that if Abiy was to invade Eritrea in pursuit of port or whatever as it might be, that Tigrayans should be on his side because Eritrea had destroyed Tigray, and that if we got an opportunity to exact revenge, that we should take it. That is a kind of belief that you hear being reflected by many Tigrayans these days. What do you make of that? But what the Tigrayans would be fully behind Abiy if he were to invade Eritrea, because they say that it is time to make Eritrea pay for the crimes and destruction that it caused in Tigray.
Look, what you just said and earlier requires some kind of psychoanalysis of what goes on in Abiy's mind. Is he obsessed with leaving a mark, his own mark on Ethiopia? Absolutely, he is obsessed with it. Building a new palace, Ethiopia doesn't need, he needs it. Building a nuclear energy in Ethiopia, does Ethiopia need it? Absolutely not. Maybe you know this about how much it costs nuclear, the cost of energy generated by nuclear plants. No, Ethiopia has a lot of hydroelectric, wind, and solar power that it doesn't really need nuclear power. But he needs it. He needs the name because he'll be the first to have done that for Ethiopia. The same thing you could say about the port. He's the conqueror of Assab. He's the man that took it back from Eritrea. He would be another Ahmed, the Ahmed that took the Constantinople from the Christians. That his name might be immortalized. Is he obsessed with those kinds of things? Absolutely, it's an obsession. It's clear. But this one is different. It's not about psychoanalysis. What you just said about Tigray is not just psychoanalysis. If it is not Abiy himself, there are many generals who want revenge. There are many generals in the military who want revenge, not just with Eritrea, but also with Tigray. So they devastated Tigray in part because it is the TPLF forces in 1991 or before that captured many of them. Look, the generals that are fond of continuing to fight. These were all the generals, beginning with the chief of staff, were captive. Do they have personal grudges against Eritrea? Of course they do. Do they have personal grudges with Tigray? Of course they do. Now they have knocked down. Do you remember how the Ethiopian chief of staff, the day they felt that they had defeated TPLF and had taken the sense of satisfaction in which he spoke about the invasion and aggression against the killing of Tigrayan is just unbelievable. You can see his sense of satisfaction. But he is, of course, a prisoner also. That was part of the Derg army. He was defeated. He was humiliated by the Eritreans. Do they want to fight against the Eritreans? Not for force, but for revenge. Absolutely. They do. They want whatever help that they can get in their fight against Eritrea, even if they could muster from the TDF that they had been fighting with 3 years ago. Absolutely. Yes. That's what they did with Eritrea, you know. They took Eritrea with them against Tigray, and now they want the TDF to be their ally in the war against Tigray. Yes, of course, this is Gentile's prosperity party tactic. That's what they have been doing. Do they want to do that again? Of course, it all depends on the TDF and the Tigray leaders if that's really what they want to do. But of course, they would love to do that. Absolutely.
Well, one final point on this port issue, and this is going to come across a bit silly, and feel free to ignore it. But from our previous discussions, one thing that I noticed is when you say these things that I think objectively true, but on the face of them they sound as though they pro-Eritrean kind of points, right, in terms of the port. And they say that it is unpatriotic of you to take these positions when you should be advancing what they see as Ethiopian positions, which is that Ethiopia should, by hook or by crook, as they say, pursue Assab, and that you have a patriotic duty to say this in public. I don't know if you'd like to address that point, but as I say, it's a silly point in a way. But I thought I would give you the opportunity to defend yourself.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said it so very explicitly. Is it unpatriotic to be against war? I recognize that Ethiopia needs access to the sea or even a sovereign port, and I suggested a way to do it. If Ethiopia wants um, um, sovereign port, there is a way. There is a way that you can get it. And I used the example of Chile and Bolivia and Jordan. There is a way to do it. War must be the last resort. We have been at it for the last 7 years. What did we get as Ethiopians? What did we get from the fight of Ethiopians against Ethiopians? Did we advance Ethiopia's cause by killing 1 million of our citizens? By becoming a diplomatic pariah? By exhausting the Ethiopian National Defense Forces? And as a result of that, unable to defend Ethiopia's territories in the north, in the northwest, in the southwest, in the south, in the southeast. Look, Assab could get in and out unencumbered. Kenya could get into Ethiopian territory, allegedly pursuing some liberation fighter forces within Ethiopian territory. They could get with impunity and get out. Even the South Sudan had taken territories from Ethiopia. South Sudan itself had taken territories from Ethiopia, and Eritrea had taken territory from Ethiopia. Is it not incumbent upon the Ethiopian government to return these territories before asking another territory? I'm not insane. I'm not blindly patriotic. I think it's more patriotic than unpatriotic to counsel for rationality, to counsel for choosing peace, to counsel for adroit diplomacy. It's not. If I speak for rationality, let me ask those people that might accuse me of siding with Eritrea. Do you want to fight with Eritrea? Is that what you want? Another war? After 7 years of war? What would be the basis? You were isolated diplomatically in the world. You're a diplomatic pariah now. The Ethiopian National Defense Forces, Ethiopian sons and daughters were killed, obliterated. You know what that Ethiopia spent on this? All of this cost is the result of war. This is a choice between war and diplomacy, negotiation, statesmanship, warlordship. I'm not on the side of the warlord. I am on the side of statesmanship, my brother. And then the final one. Who's accusing me of being with Eritrea? Who was with Eritrea? Who brought Eritrea within Ethiopia and killed Ethiopia? Maybe they don't have any moral ground. Those who say that the people or their citizens, they don't stand on any moral ground to accuse me or any other person who says this is illogical, there is no legal basis, there is no historical basis, there is no demographic rationale, there is no geographic rationale. Even if you have all of this, war is not the answer. Ethiopia has a policy. If you want to, it's called diversification of force. And I think that is a rational position. If that's not what Ethiopia wants, that Ethiopia wants a sovereign port, there is a way to do it. There is no need for gun-ho. There is no need for braggadocio. There is no need for threatening the people that fought against Ethiopians from military headquarters in Asman cannot accuse me of siding with Eritrea. They cannot. The Ethiopian defense chief who made his commanding post in Asmara to fight against Tigray, he cannot point finger at me. This were the ones that sold off Ethiopia, and to this day he's saying, Tigray, you can go. You can go. You can see. Isn't that what he says? All right. So, I am for Ethiopia and for Ethiopia's unity. What kind of Ethiopia do they want to rump Ethiopia? Do they want after asking Tigray to leave? Tigray is the foundation of the Orthodox Church, which is one of the hallmarks of Ethiopia, the first Muslim mosque in Ethiopia, the refuge of the families of Muhammad. These are Ethiopia's assets. Tigray is the area where Assab was fought. Ethiopia's independence was accepted. Tigray is the region where Ethiopia actually originated. So, Assab is the Ethiopian civilization. The civilization of its Assab. What kind of Ethiopia do they want? When they ask Tigray to leave, and then they say we're going to go to fight against Eritrea, you think this is really a position that is defensible to accuse me of siding with Eritrea? No, it doesn't stick. It doesn't. I am the patriotic one. They're unpatriotic.
Well, that more than clarifies it, Ezekiel. If we could get back to some of the internal affairs of Ethiopia and leave Eritrea to one side for now, because also time is running fast. And maybe we could start with Tigray. As you'll have noticed, Tigrayans are now at each other's throats, as the saying goes, and especially the burning issue in Tigray now is the issue of the people in IDP, and there are two viewpoints now. One is the kind of, broadly speaking, the TPLF position, which is that the invading forces must be they must be dismantled, the administration, and that a Tigrayan administration must be restored, and only after that could IDP people be returned in a safe and sensible manner. That is the TPLF position. Again, the TPLF will have its own internal political calculations on all that, but the public position is that. And then there is this new position that is being advanced by Getachew, and it says we should trust the invading administration. We shouldn't demand that they be dismantled, and that we should only return people to Western Tigray while the current occupying force is intact. I don't know. I wonder if you have followed that. But what are your views on that?
I guess I've heard what he said in Humar. So the logic is, because there is no legal authority that could return to Western Tigray or the Walqai Sagade area, because that was dismantled by the war, that there is no legal authority. Therefore, we couldn't expect that to return, is what he's saying, right? Okay. So the logic is there is no territory, there is no legal authority that could return to the territories that were taken from Tigray by force. All right? But there is a legal authority that is administering Tigray today without Western Tigray. And that resulted from the Pretoria Agreement. If we are to follow the logic of Getachew, then there shouldn't be an authority that is administering Tigray today, because the previous administration was dismantled by the war, right? That's what the logic is. That simply means that there is no Pretoria Agreement. But if what connects Tigray to Ethiopia right now is the Pretoria Agreement. Isn't Getachew a lawyer, by the way? I think he's a lawyer. He was teaching law. If what is connecting the Tigray region to Ethiopia is the Pretoria Agreement, then it is the Pretoria Agreement that should govern all of Tigray. Because if Tigray is not represented in the parliament, Tigray is not represented in the government, meaning like the governing, the executive body, it's not there. Some are returned to the military, but not all. Tigrays don't even have rights within Ethiopia right now, much less in Tigray itself. Well, in that case, if it is the controlling authority, the controlling legal authority, and I say this as somebody who simply thinks logically, not as a constitutional expert, if that is the legal authority controlling Tigray and Tigray's relationship to the federal government, and if the basis of the Pretoria Agreement is the Ethiopian constitution, what Getachew is saying doesn't hold water. Because regardless, the territory of Tigray that was taken by force must be dismantled because it was instituted by force. There is no legal basis for it. There is no constitutional basis for it. The Ethiopian constitution recognizes the Tigray's territory. That is what is known as Tigray. All the way from southern Tigray to western Tigray, that is the constitutional basis, and the agreement that is founded on the constitution states the territory must return to Tigray. But it's positive. It is in the agreement. So the territorial, returning the territory is the constitution, which is the basis of the Pretoria Agreement. And what was said in Homera about this logically doesn't make any sense to me. And as a non-constitutional expert itself, I think the territory taken by force must be returned to Tigray, whether the government in Tigray is elected or not. But it's not elected, it's appointed. It's not elected, it's appointed, but it is the result of the Pretoria Agreement that ended the conflict. That is really what should govern anything that happens in Tigray. Second, Tigrayans who were displaced, were evicted from Western Tigray, should have security. That is also part of the Pretoria Agreement. It says that the Tigray PDF forces will be dismantled commensurate with ensuring the security of the people of Tigray. It's in the Pretoria Agreement. That's what it is. So why are they saying this? Why is Getachew saying something like this when the Pretoria Agreement that he signed actually specifies this clearly, that the territory must return to Tigray? This is not, by the way, returning the territory to Tigray doesn't mean returning it to TPLF. That's not what it really means. It is to Tigray, to the people of Tigray, the real owners of that area. So I don't think this really holds water for me. But the Pretoria Agreement, that agreement that is really holding Tigray to Ethiopia right now is no longer respected by the man that put his own signature to it.
Well, I'm trying to play the devil's advocate here, but it's even then it's very difficult to make a case for what Getachew is saying. But if we were to be very charitable, if we were to take a very charitable interpretation of what he has been saying, he would say that the current interim administration in Tigray was formed following a coup against the previous interim administration, which he was the head of. And he would say that because it came through a coup, it is not a legitimate government in Tigray, and that the Pretoria Agreement has been rendered null and void. He would say that, and that Tigray doesn't have any leverage anyway to push for the implementation of the Pretoria Agreement, and that the current status of the IDP amounts to holding them hostage. and that we might as well trust Abiy and the people in Western Tigray and return the people and hope for the best. He would say things along those lines, I think.
He can say that he could say it was a coup against me. That's what he's basically saying, right? It's a coup against me. The fact of the matter is, he was standing next to Abiy Ahmed when Abiy Ahmed appointed Getachew Reda as the interim president, because the term of office of Getachew was over. That's what those said. And he was standing right there. Getachew Reda himself was there. He should have said this. At that time said this is illegal. He was standing there. He was validating the appointment by kind of handing over that authority to General Gebissa Reda. Look, he can say whatever he wants to say. I'm just preferring my own opinion on that. But when I saw that he was standing there, the next president, and by the way, what was said at the time is his term of office, Getachew's term of office was over. That was what I was saying. What was the coup d'etat? Number two, it is the TPLF that signed the Pretoria Agreement. The TPLF signed the Pretoria Agreement. That's what we remember. I don't think Getachew signed it on his own behalf. It was the TPLF. So the strict interpretation, and I alluded to this, that the security, the people that evicted, the people that are now administering Western Tigray are the people that evicted the people of Tigray from there. Aren't they? Aren't they? So now the people of Tigray that were evicted from there, displaced from there, return to the mercy of their evictors? Does that make sense, really? So I don't want to go that much into it, but TPLF signed it. The next administration after him was appointed by the Prime Minister of Ethiopia in the presence of the outgoing president, who was standing there and by his presence was approving the handover of authority to the next president. The idea this was a coup d'etat, I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know how that is a coup d'etat when the witnesses are the Prime Minister of Ethiopia and the former president of Tigray region. I don't know how that is a coup d'etat.
Well, I mean, I think, and you made this point, in general, the politics in Tigray now is a bit deranged, and maybe sometimes it helps that an outsider, and in some sense you are an outsider, although in a lot of other senses you're not, to tell them, what they should do and what might work and what might not work. So thank you for that. But more broadly, Ezekiel, on Ethiopian politics, now there is a very strong resistance movement in Oromia, as we know. There is one in Amhara, the Fano movement, and regarding Tigray, we just been talking about it. And of course, you're not a fan of the regime. You believe that Ethiopians should come together and bring about change. How is that coming along? What are this is something that I asked you before in our previous discussion, but I always come back to that because it strikes me as a very important question. How is it that Ethiopians could come together and mount a serious challenge and be in charge of their own future? Because it seems that Ethiopians are incapable of coming together and working together and challenging a common enemy, and Abiy is a common enemy of all Ethiopians.
By the way, the notion that the Tigrayans are at each other's throats is the notion that could be contested. You see some political elites that are at each other's throats. I don't think it's the people of Tigray that are at each other's throats, but I don't know if Ethiopians cannot come together. I think I see some green shoots that we have all the peoples of Ethiopia the political parties in Ethiopia and the different ideologies now realize, number one, we all have lost under this regime. We all have been victimized by this regime. So it's in the interest of everyone to come together, because the shared experience of victimhood, the price that was paid. Say something about insurgent activities in Oromia. Yeah, insurgent activities started in 2019 in Oromia. Since then, Oromia has borne, I guess, a significant part of the victimization, even to this day, by the way, even to this day, to this week. Just one example, 22 men, but mostly women and children, were killed in a place called Nono for political reasons, which I do not go into today, but 22 of them were killed, and the government did not even recognize that they were killed. But the lower level functionary of the government came out and said they were killed by Fano. Where did this Fano come from? How did they get all the way to Nono, which is near the new what is it, region, the regional administration, the central regional administration? How did they manage to get there? The Fano are supposedly from the Amhara region, so how did they manage to get all the way to Nono and kill 22 innocent people in the dark of night in their homes? What responsibility is it to? But this, I can tell you that this is in West Shawa, but it's also East Shawa, North Shawa, Western Hararge, Eastern Wallagga, Western Wallagga, Horro Guduru Wallagga, Kellam Wallagga. I can tell you examples of these kinds of killings everywhere. It's still, bloods are being spilled in Oromia. So what are we going to gain? All of us, all of the peoples of Ethiopia, the nations and the nationalities of Ethiopia, have not gained. We have not made that democratic transition that we hoped for, and I don't think we're going to be able to, because it's failed. I do not believe the government, the incumbent authorities, are able to resolve the multi-layer predicament that Ethiopia is in. So it requires every one of us. So as far as I'm concerned, the demand that we had, the rights-based demands, for instance, for political involvement, for respect of human rights, economic justice, social justice, all of these rights-based demands should be put aside, as far as I am concerned. Put it aside. Because right now, our priority is to live life. So what makes us, what unites us is that our pursuit of life, pursue life, the right to life. All other lives have become subsidiary. The main demand today in Tigray is peace and the right to life. The main demand in Amhara today is the right to life. The main demand in Oromia today is the right to life. All right? That's what unites us. On this one, we unite and we make ourselves an alternative. This government alone cannot resolve the various demands that we have right now. The political transition that we need, the transition peace that we need, the transition to economic justice that we need, the transition to sane administration that we will need, the transition to sane diplomacy is stated that we need. This transition requires all of us. What unites us is the search for peace and the right to life. This is the foundation upon which most Ethiopians, or all Ethiopians, should come together in order to occasion change. We need change. We need transition, this multiple transitions to return to a country that we all can live in. So that should unite us. If this doesn't, if this trajectory continues, there will be no Ethiopia to return
to. Well, I think it's a powerful point, the pursuit of life, the right to life, and that should be reason enough for all Ethiopians to unite. But as you know, I mean, the only opposition to the regime comes from the insurgencies that you mentioned, and then from the diaspora-based movements, like the kind of movement that you were a part of in Europe and that you're trying to get going. But one thing that worries me, and I think worries a lot of people, is that um, the regime is not facing any sort of opposition from civil opposition from Addis Ababa, for instance. There is no even semblance of opposition. The opposition in Addis Ababa has completely been silenced. And I think people wonder if there is a chance of bringing it back to life. I don't know if you have some thoughts and reflections on that, because I think as long as there is nothing in the way of opposition in the country, I think it's going to be very difficult to mount a serious challenge against the regime.
If this government continues what it does right now, as it looks like likely, then there will come a time when it will implode. It will implode. And this is not my assessment. Even the former Secretary of State of the United States said that Ethiopia is on the verge of implosion. Since he said that, things have gotten worse. But it takes us a whole show to talk about the difficulties, the challenges that Ethiopia is facing. But if the current condition is unlikely to change under this government, because look, you have relatives, right, in the country. You have relatives. You know what kind of lives they're leading. My own relatives, people who have worked for the government and are now in retirement, who you think have built enough wealth, domicile to live in, are unable to live because of the economic difficulties, which is deteriorating. What is the side of the government? What is that they're saying? Are they acknowledging that there are economic difficulties in the country? No. They're telling you there is a miracle. It's just that you don't understand. Yesterday or the day before, the Minister of Agriculture said the economic miracle, the change that they have ushered in Ethiopia, is now knocking on each household, door to resolve their problems, to make life comfortable for them. If you don't recognize that there is a problem, you are unable to resolve it. That's the state in which this government finds itself. That's the first point. Because the government does not recognize, does not acknowledge that it has a problem, it's unlikely to resolve it. Number two, you're right. There is no peaceful opposition. There is no peaceful or the peaceful arena for peaceful opposition in the country. Although it's not totally silent, there are some individuals that are above ordinary politics that actually talk about the truth about what is going on in Ethiopia. So the peaceful political arena, the political space, has been completely closed, that we know. And because of that, opposition had moved to the insurgents. So there is opposition in Ethiopia, but those are the insurgents. The insurgents in Amhara, in Oromia, or even in other places, there are insurgents that are really fighting for the same rights that the opposition, in the remnants of opposition in the urban areas are fighting for the same issues. But because the political space was completely cut off, they picked up an armed struggle to defend their rights. What they can do is to make the country ungovernable, which they have. In the Amhara region, they have obliterated a core in northeastern Amhara region, an entire core, the 803rd or 802nd Corps, comprised of 3 divisions. So war is escalating in the Amhara region, and they are also talking about another war with Eritrea. And that's why I told you earlier that I am the patriotic one. I'm the patriotic one, because I understand what's in the country. So there is opposition in the country. What is not possible in the country is the kind of transition framework, the creation of knowledge that supports a sensible transition from authoritarian, autocratic, personalist regime to a more participatory democratic regime. This time what Ethiopia needs is to learn from the failed transition and its consequences and ensure that the next transition is successful. So outside the country, people of goodwill, civil society groups, political organization representatives, members of diverse communities, scholars, political figures, human rights activists, they're coming together to try to design a roadmap for the multiple transitions that Ethiopia needs in the next political dispensation. So this is a broad-based movement. It recognizes what is needed. It's not led by political forces. They are invited to it, but it is by people who have the credibility to assemble people from various walks of life, from various ideological persuasions, to bring them together, to underscore this need. The government is unable to resolve Ethiopia's problem. It's unwilling to resolve it. It doesn't have the capacity and the willingness. Opposition in the country is, well, what the government itself is doing is leading to implosion. Third, opposition in the country is basically unarmed opposition. Because they are fighting day to day, they cannot map out the political and diplomatic side. This is what we people like us who are not in politics itself, to come together and show the way, to bring the warring factions together, to bring Ethiopians of all concerned Ethiopians together to map out a way to succeed in the political transition. And as I said, this is multiple. Peace, transition to peace, political transition to social justice, all of those transitions. So it's a complex work that we're trying to do, but to generate the ideas, package them, and disseminate them so that people buy the idea and then prepare. Even the fighters that are in the arena are also coming together under the same goal. At the end of the day, all of us have only a couple of things in common: a peaceful and prosperous country. We could have different ideas, but we have only a peaceful and prosperous country that is able to accommodate all of us. That is what needs to bring all of us together, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, I think it's very important that you redefine the whole notion of patriotism, because, as you know, in Ethiopia, it's confused with being warmongering and rabble rousing and all those sorts of things. So that's very important, and I hope many of our listeners who probably have the wrong conception of it reflect on it as well. But in terms of another interesting point that you mentioned is that the regime doesn't acknowledge that it is on the verge of implosion. There was this interesting episode, I think it's something that you will have watched, there are these events where Abiy Ahmed summons his disciples and takes them to a cave or whatever, and they get around and they tell him that he's a miracle worker, essentially. And even the Tigrayan contingent have joined in the act now. People like Getachew and Sarkan, and they are telling him that he's doing miracles. But there was an interesting moment when I think Kuma Demeksa, if I'm not mistaken, made the point that this is not the right way to go about things. That if Ethiopia doesn't become peaceful, it's going to be dangerous. And then the facial contortions that Abiy made as Kuma was making those points it's beyond description, and that tells you that he doesn't want to be told that things are not actually going in a good direction, and that makes you worry because there is an active refusal to want to face the reality. And as you say, as a result of that, because there's a rejection of reality, it might implode indeed. And I think what one worry that people have in relation to that is that when and if it implodes, there is no organized political party that would take charge and steer the country in the right direction. And I thought I would ask you if that is something that you have been pondering as well in the discussion that you have been having with other people. How is it that if that happens, the implosion happens, that we have an plan B, so to speak?
Well, we're not trying to create a government with the participants in the opposition, whether they are inside the country or outside the country or in the hills fighting against the government. At the end of the day, what Ethiopia needs is a successful democratic transition. That's what we're trying to do. The players, the actors, okay, the stakeholders must come together, and that's what we're trying to facilitate. I personally trying to facilitate this because, as far as I personally am concerned, you could be the witness. Yes, I come from the Oromo, and I've fought for the Oromo. I've defended Oromo rights, but I've also defended Tigray or Amhara or any other rights. So we're all not in one side or another, but we are all most of us are for been consistent in defending the right of people to live in peace. And what we're trying to do is to try to use that instrument to convert it to the political forces that are not working together to work together, because there is one thing that Ethiopia needs. The implosion could occur, but they should be ready for that. If you're prepared for it, you can succeed. If you're unprepared for it, another round of a failed attempt at transition could also occur. So that's what trying to bring them together, the stakeholders, bring them together, understand the importance of a successful transition, and then design a successful transition. Be stakeholders in all of it, and be prepared to be an alternative, a credible alternative. Not just because it's going to improve, but Ethiopia needs an alternative. You need an alternative all the time. You need choice. How does it make any sense that Ethiopia is going to have another round of elections in 2026 when there is no opposition, as you said? So there must be some opposition. Now, with regard to the theater in Bale, but also in Koita, because not only in Bale, it's also in Koita. This is an affirmation of the point that I made, that the government will implode because it doesn't recognize that problems exist. This was an exercise in futility to try to project confidence in Vale, confidence that this man, the president, is able to rise above anything and see what people cannot see. This is what dictators in power are doing. What they were doing, those elderly people sitting there, what they were telling him is, everything is okay. Everything is okay. Nothing is beyond your sight. Nothing is beyond your ability. You can make miracles. All of these problems that people are talking about, the absence of peace, the absence of prosperity, it's just because they can't see. Even us, they said, even us did not see, Barry. We did not see it. We've been here, but we haven't seen it. You may not see it. You just opened our eyes.
I think the funniest one was when one of the ministers, so-called ministers, said that it was thanks to Abiy that he saw elephants, I think, for the first time in his life. Yeah.
Yeah. This has been happening, by the way. It's not only in Bale and in Koita. He did it in Amberito. He did it when climbing steps on the mountain in different sites. He was doing exactly the same thing. What I was trying to say here is this affirms that even he understands that his grips are loosening. Even the president of Prosperity Party, he understands. He feels it. He feels it. Absolutely, you have to feel it when Mirre Wadaga's group could obliterate a core of your military. You have to understand. You're not blind that much to it. And you have such a penetrating eye that others cannot see. You have to be able to see. So he knows. He knows, but he's denying. He's been denying it on television for 4 days in Ethiopia to deny that there is economic problem. This is an exercise in vanity, and these people are there to confirm or affirm his own predilection that things are okay. And you're right. It's not only Commander Makta. Erkan Gabetunsai also said something about, well, in order to continue this prosperity, we need peace. We should protect our peace and reform the political structure, adjust the political system somewhat. If we do that, we can continue. This is after saying that you're the greatest. I've never been here. I was the chief of staff, but I've never been here. I've never seen this. This is everybody said. Everybody said there were trees here, but we haven't seen it. There were rivers here, we haven't seen it. There were animals here, but we haven't seen it. You opened our eyes to see an elephant, you said, right? An elephant or a rock, or yeah. This affirms that even the dictator now believes that people have to tell him, so that he has to hear not the negative stories, but positive stories. That's why it will implode. That is the reason why it's going to implode. That's why they're losing, because he wants to deny reality instead of resolving it. If you don't resolve this country, there's got constant problems in the country: problem of peace, problem of administration, problem of political cohesion, economic problems. All of these multi-layered problems, if you don't address it, it is likely to cause implosion under the weight of the problems itself. So yes, whatever they're doing in all parts of Ethiopia, it's indication that he doesn't want to hear. Did he show that, by the way, when Kuma said the reason that people are picking up arms is because they have no space? He came up and he said, since time of Theodorus, we've never had peace. We've always had with conflict. That's what he said.
Yeah, I think there is this thing that we always, there is this thing that we always say, there has always been war. It's just that social media now has amplified it. It's a point that he always makes. Yeah.
Yes. Let me break it to him, right? In the 27 years that the EPRDF was in power, there were minor skirmishes and conflicts here and there, but there was peace. You can go from any part of the country to any country without any fear of being mugged or abducted or being killed. Don't deny. He said he wanted to delete. You can't delete it. You don't remember that? You don't remember that? I remember. You can't go anywhere without any peace. You can't do that. So the 27 years, the EPRDF, Mellos was right about one thing among other things. He said, we're not going to fight. We're not going to return. Even the defense spending went down to 2% to affirm the fact that they prioritize development over war. That time, the 27 years, there were uprisings demanding political rights, but there was no civil war. There was relative peace.
Well, Ezekiel, earlier I asked you to defend yourself, but we at Tagat recognize that you are honorable, public, intellectual, courageous man, and afraid to tell the truth to power, as they say, which is why we want to have you on always. And also among our viewers, I think there is a sense of appreciation, even among people who, for one reason might or another, might disagree with you, but they don't doubt that you say what you think, and we value that a great deal, especially given that the Ethiopian political space is completely devoid of people with a degree of honor and integrity. So we have immense respect for you, Ezekiel, and I think we will leave it at that for today. But we will hope that we will come back again, because there will be a lot of things happening in the near future. But thank you very much for today.
Thank you for the kind words and for work that you do. And I'll be happy to do it. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure indeed.